I do teach 1A Mechatronics students, and this is my setup lecture, so going through that example. And so we're going to see today here, I'm going to go through the first part where I introduce the problem very quickly so that we can get to that example. So just a couple of reminders if I got started. You would have seen Camtasia there go 3, 2, 1. I am videoing the lectures. The video does get posted to Learn for the entire term. It takes me a couple hours to get it rendered, so give me a bit of time with it. Also, the OneNote and the PDFs will be posted to Learn as well. Another reminder, assignments are starting this week in my course. The 48-hour extension, if you seek help either before or after that assignment due date, you will get that 48-hour extension. So let's get started now. And the first thing here, and as I said, I was going to go through this very quickly, is programming process. So this is something I might have taken a little bit longer to talk through if I was giving this lecture. But again, I want you to see that example where I set everything up. So when we're trying to design our programs, we're not just going to start typing right away. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to understand the problem. And that is what this example is going to be about, is understanding what should we be doing. Later on in the term, we're going to be programming robots, which is always like super fun. And we've got to decide, you know, should the robot be moving forward? How do we avoid bumping into the wall? All of those kind of wonderful things. So you're going to understand that problem. Then you're going to think of the steps. What is that program going to go through? What is that robot going to do? Now, as you're going through this, you may find that as you're thinking about the steps, that you don't actually understand the problem, and you may have to keep going back through this process. It's an iterative process we're going to be working on. The next thing is test cases, and this is how we're going to test the program. How do we know that that program is going to work? And you notice in this case, we still haven't actually sat down at that computer to code it yet. So when I've thought about how I'm going to test it, what I'm going to do with it, now we're going to code it. Again, as part of the coding, things may occur to us. We may have to go back and think of another test case. May have to go back and think to that all-important understanding the problem. And then finally, what you're going to do is that testing and debugging, that verifying that your design is going to work. So my example here, which is going to really focus on understanding that problem. And this actually happens to be a fairly nice example, because normally I'm, pretending here that you're 120 first-year students, you're all lined up in rows, all looking at me. But we are still going to be thinking about the food we had at lunch. So for my example, what I want to do is I want to have the computer program calculate the restaurant bill for me. So it's as if you're going to start with a subtotal. So that's going to be the cost of what we had on our first course and those fabulous chocolate things for dessert and the drinks and things like that. And you're going to take that subtotal and it's going to go over to that total. Now, I will point out here, there's a bit of a distance. Normally, I would be writing this on the screen myself, but there's a bit of a distance to where my computer is. So pretend that this is my handwriting as well here. So I'm going to go from subtotal to total. Now, what do? We've got subtotal. We've got to bring in a few other things. We've got to bring in tax, because that's the way things run there. So one of the things we've got to think about is how to calculate tax. And customary in, Ontario, and I think most of Canada, we usually include a tip in the bill as well. So this is what we need. The person's going to tell us what the subtotal is. We're going to calculate tax. We're going to calculate tip. So how do I calculate tax? Thoughts? Ideas? Anybody? Tax? Anybody paid a restaurant bill lately? What do I do for tax? Anybody know the rates? 13%, thank you. So there's not much to that. I'm going to take that and I'm going to say let's multiply it by that 13%. Okay, now we're going to figure out the tip. How should I figure out the tip? 20% of the subtotal. Okay, I got 20% of the subtotal. Okay, so we've got somebody there, thinks about it. 20% of the subtotal, that could be generous in some parts. I know some cheap people. What other thing? If I don't want to do 20% of the subtotal, what should I do? Double the tax. Double the tax. Okay. That would be a rule I wouldn't want to take with me to Alberta, because they don't have a lot of tax in Alberta, but I could double the tax. What's another option that I could be having? Any thoughts on this? Oh, see, here's an interesting thing. Tip it with the tax included. So even if I have my 20% or I have my 15%, I could be tax included, or I could be tax not included. And that's usually something that some people can get really controversial on as to whether you should be tipping on the tax. Now, if you think about the application, and this is where we're eventually going to be going on this, we're going to be thinking about this programming application. When you go into your restaurant and you use that automatic thing that's going to do your tip calculation for you, they thought about their application, and their application was making money. And so what do you think when you do that percentage? Is it on the tax or not on the tax? It's on the tax, right? And that's that application. So thinking about how this is going to be used, they have deliberately said, we're going to pick something that's going to be more money. Now, is that what we want to do? We want to type in a total and that's how we're going to do this calculation? Or are there other ways that we could be figuring out the tip? You could just ask the customer. Yeah, I could just even just say an amount, right? I have a relative who likes everything to round to a round number at the end of it. So that'll be like, $3.52 tip or whatever it takes there. So that's another one. We could be rounding that one in terms of what we're doing here. Does everybody tip? Yes? No? Depends. Does it depend on the service? Right? Because you might look at that and you might say, yeah, okay. Depending on what the service is going to be, we might not even want to tip at all. So now this is going to bring in some other things when we're starting to think about our design here is, should it be, I just ask you for a number that says, what is the subtotal? Should it be that tax is already preset for us because then we don't have to remember it? But should we even be asking for a number here? Should we be thinking about this and saying, how is the service? Rate it, good, bad, all those kind of things. There's a lot of options that we're going to have to be thinking about when we are going through this restaurant bill. Now, of the ones that we've got up there, let's see, if we kind of read them through, we've got 20% of the subtotal, we've got double the tax, we've got tipping tax or not tax, that's kind of another option we've got to think about. We've got tipping amount, and we've got round to an even number. Do we have a preference out there? There are a lot of 20% people or not. You're a 20% person. You might get to decide this because the rest of them are all really quiet here, right? Has anybody been wait staff and has opinions on what we should be doing as kind of customary? Should I let you vote?
My wife was wait staff.
Your wife was wait staff? So you're 20% straight of tax on tip or on tax or not? 20% before tax. Okay. That one's easy to calculate. And in fact, if I want to take this back to my example, I'm going to take it back to lecture example. And we're going to pick one of these easy ones because my application is lecture example. So in this case of my application, it's like we already have to enter in the subtotal. This one's going to be declared nicely for a constant. So maybe 20% could be something that we could just hard code because it's simple and we're just learning how to program on that first day. Now, this is where at this point, if I had another 40 minutes or so to give the rest of this lecture, we'd go through our flow chart, we'd go through our test cases, we'd find interesting things with the test case if I let us type in a number and type in a negative number and what happens to that, because I can get the money back. But I will finish it off there. Thank you.